It is my pleasure to officially welcome each and every one of you to this very important conversation with Andy Walsh. He is a venture builder, founder, advisor, strategist, and most importantly, he is an ambassador for the Fourth Effect. And to all the pre-seed through Series A founders in the Zoom room, do not be worried because Andy is laser focused on the topic that is always top of mind for pre-seed through Series A startup founders, which is how to access funding. So no matter what Andy is talking about, that is underpinning the value that is being brought to startups, which I think is, I just wanted to get out in front of that and mention that because I get it. And I think that's so important because it's so true. That is what we're all thinking about. So we are going to hear from Andy all about brand health and how it goes beyond products and profits, how it's about aligning internal culture, with the broader community that you serve. He is going to help us explore the importance of building brand health by fostering a deep connection between internal culture and then community culture. And I am very interested in this, understanding how authentic alignment drives trust, loyalty, and long-term growth while creating a brand that's not only respected, but also deeply connected to the people that it serves. I'm really interested in this topic because I am, as a founder of a seed stage mission-driven startup that cares a lot about authentic alignment and trust within our community, understanding how to leverage that is really, really key. So very cool topic. Before we dive in, just a really quick word about the Fourth Effect. For those of you, I know many of you are already part of the Fourth Effect. So you already know how great it is. For those of you in the audience who are not part of the Fourth Effect, who have not come inside our platform and our community as a startup founder or as an advisor or possibly as an investor, I really want to encourage you to consider doing that. We have around 1,000 pre-seed through Series A startup founders today inside the platform, building out their advisory board, governing board, and fundraising. And we're really helping startups understand what these boards entail, really demystifying how to create them, how to paper them, how to compensate for them, why they want them, who they should put in those seats, and also how all of this will help them scale. So help them fundraise, get money in the door directly and indirectly, and grow, hit KPIs, et cetera. So that is what we're all about for founders. And then by doing this, we are creating a bunch of for-profit board and opportunities and investment opportunities that wouldn't necessarily be created or be accessible. And we're making those opportunities available to the other people in our community who want to take those seats and who might want to write those checks because they want to break in to for-profit board service and investing. So if I am speaking to you, if this is something that you feel would bring you value as a startup founder or as an individual, and sometimes they're not mutually exclusive, you can be both, please sign up for a platform tour. I know we just shared a link in the chat. That's the best way to, it's kind of like a live onboarding session. We'll show you how to click on the link and start your free trial and make sure you get off to a good start. And then we'll also share some other links. We do a lot of programming, board bootcamp. We do it every 6 weeks or so. It's a great overview. It's for founders and for people who want to, take the seats. It's 2 hours long. It's really interactive. There's a lot of worksheets. So all that, we're sharing it along with a code. It's free if you are a member, but if you have not signed up as a premium member yet, then you do have to pay. So it doesn't really make sense. You should just sign up, but we'll give you a code to make it pretty cheap. Please follow us on LinkedIn. And that's all I have to say. So now let's get to the point of today. Andy, it's my pleasure to officially welcome you to the spotlight here and hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Breen. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't see how many people are there and I can't see the chat, but as far as format today, I want this to be quite iterative. So what I'm presenting, I'm happy to take questions as we go. I think that's probably a great way to get value out of that. I'll leave my details on here too. So if anyone has any questions afterwards, happy to take emails and talk further. And we'll go into sort of my background and potentially how I can help shortly. And also this deck and presentation will be available on the Fourth Effect afterwards as well. So I'm excited to share that. If you check out my LinkedIn, I share a lot of my working models, my frameworks, insights from my experience. And I'm a big sharer. I believe that there's no real secret in what we do, and that we should be sharing more. So I take that attitude all the way through. So, Breen, if there's an easy way to pop up questions as we go, just sort of maybe even just feel free to interrupt. Okay, so kicking off.
Sorry, I was muted and now I've unmuted myself. Oh, sorry, Andy. I was.
We're losing you a bit now. Oh, good. We'll work that out as we go. I think we've lost you, Breen. Okay, so I'll get started. So, Andy Walsh, I'm currently wearing a few different hats. So I work in a venture studio as Chief Incubation Officer, and that's called Nobody Studios. It's a business that acts as private equity, but creates companies from concept right through to exit. I manage the internal team, which involves product, tech, marketing, sales, everything that you would expect that happens in a vertical across a business. And then I also manage our portfolio of companies. So we have 7 at the moment. So I'm working with CEOs, founders, all the teams on that part of it. And then outside of that, I have Method, which is my own consultancy. I do investments myself at an angel level. I also do consulting on brand strategy, business strategy, and quite active in fractional work. And then also, as Breen called out, I'm an ambassador for the Fourth Effect, which for me is really important. I focus a lot on startups that are outliers, which is very much my mission to be able to connect the right people to others that can help them on their journey. I think there's still some major problems we need to solve as an industry. So I was focused where I can help on those kind of platforms. So getting started. So for me, my background, it's jumping forward. So I'm from Tasmania in Australia, which is the little island off the bottom. For those of you who know Australia, I've been here for 12 years. And for me, it's sort of, there's something quite beautiful about this city that just brings me in from a professional perspective, but also personal perspective. I'm lucky to have a 10-year-old daughter, which is a lot of fun in this city. At university, which is interesting to look back at this now. I did a double degree in marketing and exercise science. And what I do now, I actually find the science part is more useful, particularly in human psychology, physiology, and things about how we act. From a professional perspective, I've 3 times founder. I've had 2 exits. Within that, my background was in brand strategy, so anchored in storytelling. I started out in very culture forward businesses, so working in music, art, and fashion. And if any of you are familiar with those audiences, they're quite particular and fickle if you're trying to show up in their world and potentially borrow some of that cultural credibility. So I spent a lot of time understanding human beings, is the short version of that. We won a bunch of Cannes Lions for my businesses that I started, Clio Awards, South by Southwest Innovation Awards. My company that I started in 2012 here, we scaled from 0 to 35 people in a couple of years. We're doing 10 million plus in annual revenue. My background also stretches into tech innovation and audio branding. So creating product sounds, things that you probably hear all the time. So my company created sounds for Xbox platform, Microsoft Teams, everything you hear on that, Ford Cars, Tinder, X, actually it was Twitter before they came X. Lots of places where sort of sound shows up. So I've done quite a wide range of things. And from a purpose perspective, which is very important for us, which we'll touch on today a lot. For me, this is my own personal purpose. So venture beyond the obvious and the easy paths. And I think for me, that's included many things in my life, from moving to another country, starting businesses, but also finding ways for the world to be a better place in decisions that we make every day, from a business perspective, personal perspective. And the reason that the street light is there, there's a great saying which I'll paraphrase, which is, stepping outside of the light and into the dark to be able to find things that other people miss. And I love that as a metaphor in the sense of how we live our lives. So I have my own personal brand strategy, my own business plan, which I'm rolling out at the moment. And I love being able to sort of challenge myself on a daily basis. And just the last bit in there, that the picture of me as a cartoon was my first take using generative AI, which I found funny that it made me an astronaut with a hat and glasses on, but something that I love to play around with is new tech. Okay, so getting to the heart of what we'll cover today, I call it a culture multiplier, and it's fascinating that my world in sort of music, art, and fashion has gone full circle now, and I use a lot of that thinking in work again. And the way that that multiplies is from teams, so internally to customers, and they're the early adopters right through to a mass audience. So what I'll do today, there'll be a few frameworks that I share that I'll talk and cover, but also I'll go into some principles in the sense of human psychology and the way that humans respond historically, but also today and what's most relevant. So where to start? If you're thinking about at a very early stage, or even if you're not early stage and you need to sort of rethink the way that you show up in the world, Simon Sinek, the Golden Circle, it's a really well-established process, and there's nothing else that I've seen or tried that works as hard as this. And it's quite a simple model too to get your head around. And the whole thing here is that you start with your why. And the why is right at the heart of what you do, sort of why you're doing what you're doing, something that other people can buy into as well. So it needs to be relevant and translate across to everyone from investors to customers to partners, anyone that's involved in what you do sort of day to day. And the flow and effect of that is quite significant. So it's the ability to transform leadership, innovation, and business success. And it gives you very much a North Star that you can focus on and build upon as you go. Okay, so the starting off with the why. And this is very much that we're not creating something that we just want to sell. It's not transactional. Today, brands very much need to have these deep connections with audiences to survive. And for startups, it's very much those early adopters and that sort of minimal viable audience that you have at the start, right through to major corporations. And you'll see that a lot where big companies now are reverse engineering purpose, community, and elements that allow them to show up in a way that has more value and is more authentic. And the big outcome that you're trying to attain here is building a movement. And a movement is something where people buy into what you're doing more than just the product that you sell or the service that you sell. So for that, it's very much like that core motivator. What's the thing that drives you every day? If you do this well at an early stage, you can inspire founders, co-founders, teams, and everyone who's driving your mission forward. Connecting with customers emotionally, and connecting emotionally is how you get retention. It's how you get people to really think about you in a way that is much bigger than what you're actually selling. I'll give you some examples of that later. Attracting like-minded investors. So for those of you who are investors, those in startup world, you want to have a culture where it's mutually beneficial, where you have people coming in with capital that are able to help elevate or scale your mission in a much faster fashion. But that dynamic that you create and that relationship that you form is really important to the culture of your company, the purpose, and everything that you're doing. So being quite forthright with purpose is a great way to establish those tight sort of foundational relationships. And it also guides decisions. So if you're having, it could be a big ethical decision, it could be a campaign decision, but having a strong, clear purpose allows you to be quick and nimble with making decisions so that you can move forward at pace. Okay, the how, the next layer out. So this is very much around the unique actions that you take when you're sort of living your best version of yourself. So if you feel like you're in the groove and you've got a flow state and you're able to elevate what you're doing in a way because you know exactly where you want to get to. And this is very much how you're bringing the why to life. So the why is your purpose, and this is how do you actually manifest that purpose. So here are the values that you bring in your company, the processes that you define, the differentiators that ultimately set you apart. So this allows you to be consistent with how your purpose rolls out. So the why. So you have this structured in a way where you're actively doing things consistently as a company, and that from communication to how you work as a team, all those things go hand in hand, and that allows you to act at pace. But it's something you should also be checking in on regularly. So I won't go too much into that active learning process today, but you need to make sure that you're stress testing that as you go. You'll see there in success, so that blueprint for execution, it's one of the things that you do to make sure that you are moving at pace, driving company purpose repeatedly. So that repetition, if you have staff, and I'll talk to that a little bit later, if everyone buys into the purpose, that's a really, really strong way to be able to amplify that mission. But it also means that you're consistently talking to the same message. And then the big thing that you do by doing that is create credibility and trust. So transparency and authenticity are words that probably heard rather a lot in the last probably year to 2 years. And I think everyone has found their version of that. Some of them I think are more contrived than others. Some are quite genuine. So if you start with your purpose from a strategy point of view from day one, it drives your business, and then you don't have to reverse engineer it. Okay, the last layer, this is the what. So this is your product or service that you're actually taking to market. And this is probably the easiest one to do, ultimately defining what it is and I guess what value do you offer customers. And customers in this world need something that actually adds to their lives. You need to solve a problem. You need to create something that adds inspiration, color, it solves problems in that maybe it's efficiency, whatever that looks like, you've got to add value. But describing that needs to be something that's translatable. So for success there, you'll see it's something it's easy for customers to learn and repeat. And what I mean by that is that if you describe what your product is to someone that you meet in an elevator going to a conference, they should then be able to go in that conference and say, hey, I just met Tom in the elevator. He has a business doing X and Y, and it's very easy to translate. And then ultimately, this needs to go back to the why as well. So the product is a manifestation of your why. So it's connecting the why you're doing something to what you're doing. Okay, to put this into an example, Airbnb is someone that I respect, not just because of success, but how they've spent a lot of time, particularly during COVID, to really go back and refocus on the brand. So they're looking at their why, how, what. For them, the why is to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. So it's lofty, and that's very deliberate. And anything in the why and the purpose, it's almost like a goal where it's something you don't ever probably achieve, but it allows you to have energy, intention, and purpose with what you're actually doing. Their how is to empower individuals to share their homes and create unique local experiences for travelers. And within that, before I talked about how this needs to connect to the why. So the how they're going to do that. So the belonging piece is what they focus on in the why, and the how they're going to do that is to connect people through accommodation and experiences, which are the two things that they focus on. Obviously, they're known for accommodation, but experiences is where they're going, and they're expanding that at the moment. And then the what is a very simple description. So it's a platform where people can actually book and connect. So that's the more functional part of what they're doing, but really important to sort of pull it into an example. So that's the first part there. Again, if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to take that now, or I can keep moving forward to the second module here. I can't see the chat, by the way.
I think, okay. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Andy. I was trying to speak before, but okay. But I can see the chat, and I think you are good for now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Setting up your purpose in that golden circle is your first step, but there's things that you need to do to maintain that as well. So what I'll do here is break out these three elements of internal culture, early adopters, and mass audience. So internal culture. If your team is thriving and they're sort of very motivated on what you're doing, they believe in where you're going, like the ability for that to impact the day-to-day is significant. So there's around productivity, retention, creativity, investment. So I call out investment there as well, because the ability for everyone to be so passionate about what they do comes through in conversations, in social content, in advertising, ultimately trying to make your brand famous. And that drives attention for investors, but also customers, of course. And just some data here. I realize that my data source has dropped off here. I'll add it before I upload the deck. But the benefits here, that innovation potential, and that innovation potential, that 3 times multiplier, is anchored around the fact that if you have a team of people that believe in your purpose, they're going to be inspired, and the ability to create new ideas, things that may challenge what you're already doing, challenging things in a constructive way, allows you to be more successful than you would if you didn't have that. Higher revenue speaks for itself. If you've got an aligned team that's effective, and they're focused on the outcome, then your ability to get more revenue faster, and more effectively, is a great benefit, of course. And then something as simple as lower absenteeism. There's a lot of stuff out there around understanding human beings. And one of the ones that I love and pay a lot of attention to is that if you have someone who's a personality in your team, and there's challenges that your company is facing, if that person goes quiet, and all of a sudden is not engaged as they used to be, it's a telltale sign that they're probably checked out, and they're not engaged. And that reflects in absenteeism, contributions to meetings, etc. So there's all these patterns you can start to notice in there. So trying to get out in front of that is really important as well. And the way that is great at doing that is psychological safety. So the things that are key for success here, when you're creating purpose, is it needs to actually carry through. So the principles on the left there around leadership and that trust. So the leaders in the company, and that can be anyone who is acting and behaving in the right way that aligns with company values, it needs to be done top down and bottom up. Core values, so any sort of decisions you're making need to make sure that they're consistent across all team members. Developing team members, so allowing people to have opportunities to learn, to grow, to contribute at new levels. Having an inclusive culture. And there's great examples in psychological safety about inclusion. For me, a really simple one, imagine you have a team of people here in the US, and there's half of your team that have English as a second language. To be able to have an equal contribution in a meeting, it's respectful and the right thing to do to get the most benefit, to actually give people materials in advance. So if you have to digest in a language that is second to you, then quite often that can mean on the fly they're not able to contribute at the same level. So giving those materials to people in advance means that they can read, they can digest, they know what's coming, and then they can contribute in a way that actually feels for them that they're having greater impact. And then the outcome of that is much better because you've got wider perspectives of people. Psychological safety, to sort of double down on that, there's a lot of ways that you can do, sustain internal culture. But this whole thing, it goes around trust, and you build trust by having openness and respect. And it could be an intern and it could be the CEO. But if you have a platform where people can contribute ideas, it's really important that people feel confident to speak up. The counter to that is that you don't want to have a death by committee type situation where everyone gets a vote or an opinion. But if someone has something valid to add rather, or they're doing something constructive, then it's really important you create an environment to do that. And then going into that strategy around psychological safety, leadership, obviously it starts at the top. So embodying core values, transparency, reinforcing purpose, the process. So how do you test, learn, and grow? There's a great psychological thing around thinking like a scientist. So you create a hypothesis, you test that out, and you're actively learning. So, within that, people talk about failure a lot. For me, I don't use the word failure. It's about how do we actually learn from something that's happened, having the confidence and ability to feel like you can test things out. You understand the consequence of that going bad or it going well in equal portion, but actively doing that. And then authenticity. So again, I'll use this word a lot today, but it's very much around how do you then take your purpose and share that internally and then scale that out into customers, which we'll go on to in the next session. Okay, so early adopters. Early adopters, I talk in a framework with my teams around minimal viable audience, and it could be your first customer, your 10th customer, or your first 1,000 customers. But they're the people who believe in what you're doing. They're going to be the ones that will lean into giving you feedback, and you need to nurture that group. And those early adopters are really powerful to get up to a point where you're making revenue quickly. They'll also amplify what you're doing, and they play a really powerful role. And with any of the companies that I mentor or advise or I'm involved with directly, it's something that we really focus on is nurturing that community. Just some really interesting data here. So kicking off with that sort of statement that internal culture equals your external brand. So if you think about culture, culture is around shared values and stories that you have as a collective. And if you think about those people who are together amplifying that message, that becomes your external brand, because everything that you're doing has this very active mindset of people thinking and behaving in the same way. So when that culture is strong, it resonates outwards. Some data here around the customer side. So the piece around authenticity, super high, 86% expect that. And that if there's anything where brands are caught out, then customers will see through that. Shared values driving loyalty. So if customers feel like the values of the company align with what their values are, it allows them to keep coming back because they actually feel like they've got a greater cause outside of just whatever they're purchasing. And the big one there at the end is the people trust referrals from friends over ads. I mean, that makes practical sense. But if you think about that number, if you're able to articulate your values, your purpose to customers, and they believe in that, you're getting this active community of ambassadors that aren't getting paid, but they believe in what you're doing and they'll tell their friends. It's a great way to get groundswell and sort of start that undercurrent of change. To give you an example about early adopters here, it's all around amplifying your culture. And I've called out 3 things here that help build trust. And the first one there in that Venn is live the brand. So living the brand is around reflecting values in every customer interaction. And what that means is it could be customer service, it could be a chat on website, it could be something you have in person with a customer, it could be formal research, but making sure that all those things that you do, you're living and breathing those values, because they're the things that stick sometimes more than the actual service and product itself. Engaging the customers in culture. So if you're purpose driven and you have initiatives that you're driving as a company, sharing those stories, telling those stories, let customers be a part of it. It's amazing how customers will lean into a brand experience, even if it's a volunteer situation or something that has a greater good, and they want to be a part of it. Brands are famous bigger than what they actually do. So there's some great currency that comes out of that. And then openly sharing stories. So there's things that I've seen which are quite beautiful, and I'll talk to some examples in a minute around things that have happened that haven't gone well and brands owning that. And it's not necessarily something that is illegal or bad. It could just be a human error and a mistake where rather than trying to cover it up, brands actually actively share it and tell that story to show that we are all human and we're not this sort of micromanaging controlled space. Some of my favorites that I love to follow, Oatly is a great one. If you sort of think about Oatly is oat milk, there's nothing very sexy about oat milk as far as a brand that you really are passionate about. I don't think many people I know are passionate about oat milk, but the way that they have told their story, there's a guy, Kevin, who was their creative director, who's now no longer there. It's amazing sort of human in telling stories. And there's an ad there, that Wow No Cow. It came out in 2014, but it got banned because it was basically saying that cow's milk is not for humans, and that oat milk is designed for humans. It came back again just recently, featured in a Super Bowl campaign, but they're sort of like having fun with the fact around that it's not just a milk alternative, it's actually a human food. And just being that provocative is something that I really love. Liquid Death, it comes up a lot in case studies, but if you think about what they've done in the category of seltzer water, seltzer is something that, there's so many categories, but if you were to think about from a masculine perspective of people that lean into that kind of drinks category, a lot of the colors of seltzer water are quite pastel and bright and fun and vibrant. Liquid Death sort of went the other way, targeting males with a bigger size can, with a brand that seems very punk rock in what they're doing. And this example, the Better Than Back Sweat one, there was a comment that went on one of their social media posts from someone that, is trolling, which is very common, that they thought the product tasted like bat sweat. So they actually did a TV commercial and they had people drinking Liquid Death and then licking the sweat off that guy's back to compare the two flavors, just to sort of poke fun at that person, but own that conversation and sort of demonstrate their product value. Cereal on the right is a cereal company. Again, cereal's not anything that's a very exciting product. It's a British company, and I love their ironic humor. It is very British in nature. But this is a major outdoor campaign they did. If you can see that on the screen there, where they're saying they're Dwayne Johnson's favorite cereal. And they did it with a whole bunch of names that sound like celebrity names, but with the caveat there that Dwayne is a bus driver from London. So they just found people that had the same name as celebrities, and getting traction around that. Well, they didn't need an endorsement. They weren't sued, but just having that sort of fun. And again, it allows you to feel a relationship with that brand in a way that's much bigger than the actual product itself. Okay, this is the last part here as far as the mass audience. And this is very much around thinking, how do you scale? If you've got those early adopters, and you've got loyalty, your customer base is growing, they love what you're doing, to be able to scale that into either a national brand or a global brand, you need to be able to retain culture and retain that purpose. And you quite often see brands fail at this stage where they, the word sell out happens a lot and you're trying to get distribution and scale and make more money. And it's a really hard stage to navigate as a company. So there's some things that you need to think about in this process. So starting here about this authenticity piece. So how do you retain that ethos? Is very much focused around customer-centric growth. And what that means is staying true to who you are and leaning into your customers, but being able to back yourself, understand who you're talking to, whether it's a new segment, a new market, a different country, and just think about how do you continue to be true to yourself, because it's like telling a lie versus telling the truth. If you tell a lie, you need to remember the lie you told. If you tell the truth, it's easy to recall the story. It's the same thing for a brand. If you're able to amplify your message and back yourself, then you be consistent. You just fall back on that all the time, and it allows you to have success at scale. So some of the principles in that, staying true to core values. So making sure that as you expand, that you're articulating that to new customers and taking them on the same journey that people have had from, the loyal ones that were there from the start. Leveraging customers. So what are the ways that you can turn customers into brand advocates? I use Sonos as an example for that all the time. If any of you have Sonos speakers at home, they've got this amazing, passionate group of people who actively manage forums for them. So if you can't get the help you need from a tech support, there's all these people that volunteer to manage these forums, and give you feedback because they love the brand so much. What they get out of that are discounts on products, they get early access to products, and there's very much a codependency there, but a mutual benefit for both. Personalized scaling. So in a world of data, we've got so many things that we can do to personalize things. If you're in sales, you probably know the platform Clay. It's this amazing way to be able to very quickly get a list of warm leads from a sales perspective by understanding every person individually and giving them a custom message And that kind of personalization is a very simple sales example. But if you're thinking about different markets, different states, different cities, like what can you do to make people feel like that you understand who they are, where they are, because we can't treat everyone the same. And then the last one here, building a community. So a community is so powerful, and it goes back to my background in culture, where using music as an example, if there's a band that you love, a really simple example, you could go to a concert and you could be arm in arm with the perfect stranger singing one of your favorite songs, and it connects you in a way that's very unique. And you may not do that with a brand, but the ability to have people who are passionate and like-minded share values is a really powerful thing to sustain your brand and grow it in a very organic way. So this is something that I use all the time when I'm looking with any of my startups that I work with, is how do you actually think about community? And this is sort of very much a thing around human inspiration and dopamine hits ultimately, as far as things that we actively seek. So trends I talk about as a bigger macro trend. So not something that's trending on social media. It's something that is a pattern that's happening in a period of time where people start to follow it, get engaged, and become part of something and can follow it more actively. And if you follow a trend for a long enough time, it turns into a passion. And a passion is something that you actively seek out, you participate in. It connects you in a way with other people that are like-minded and also have similar passions. And that's where community is formed. So if you want to nurture that from a company and brand perspective, you need to be able to seek out the things that your community are talking about, and then leverage that in a way that sort of has a very active feedback loop. So you hear what they're saying, what they love, and you're able to spin out stories from your community, but also find new ways to engage new customers. So I can't speak like about community, like more importantly, in the sense of how you retain what you're doing in a way that has consistency. Okay, so just to recap here at the end, so there's three areas that we covered today: internal culture, early adopters, and mass audience. And from a snapshot perspective, here are things that sort of I think are most important in each. So the internal culture is that golden circle model. So start with the why, which is your purpose, and make sure that carries through. With your early adopters, amplifying your culture. So building trust by living your brand, openly sharing stories, and engaging customers in your culture. And then mass audience is how you build community and scale that. So identifying trends and passions that are part of your brand, and really leaning into that and amplifying those elements. So it's a big one that can work really hard for you if you get it right. You just need to spend a little bit of time to get that strategy working. I'll leave you with something that I love, which is this whole piece around creativity. And with creativity, I don't mean being a creative or being an artist of any kind. It's very much anchored in the fact of being idea focused, innovation focused, and being able to do things that you didn't think were capable of doing. So, and the way that you do this is if you have a clear view of the world and see the change you want to make. So it's very future focused. So try and peek around corners, see what trends are happening, and lean into that and be a part of it, and think about how you can create a product or brand that lives in the future, because that's where you'll really get traction and get something that sticks and is sustainable as well. So they're my details. I'm happy for you to reach out at any point. As I said, I'll share all of this slides and the recording. I'm sure the Fourth Effect guys will send that out, Breen. But yeah, thank you for listening. Hopefully you've got a lot out of that, and look forward to hearing any more questions.
There are a couple of questions. So, okay. So one question, what advice would you give for non-consumer companies? So, B2B, SaaS, for example, to build and maintain their brand?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, whether it's mass consumers or a B2B environment, you're still building relationships. So being able to identify your target customer, understand their wants, needs, passions, etc. It's the same process as what you do with a consumer brand. Where you communicate, how you build community, etc., is probably different in how you execute that from a strategic standpoint. But ultimately, you want to make sure that your values and your purpose are very clear to external people, because that's ultimately what sparks emotions and builds that connection between them and yourself.
Okay, so that's a good answer. And then another question. So as you mentioned, or as I pointed out from uh, your LinkedIn handle, caring so much about funding for pre-seed through Series A founders. Here's a question that connects back to that. So constantly founders are struggling, right, for our need to fundraise and to get money in the door wherever that money comes from. So do you have any tips for how we can ensure that we attract the right funding partners that really align with this values and vision, especially when you're like a mission-driven startup, for instance?
Yeah, definitely. And the ultimate like success story is brand fame. So unfortunately, we face a lot of bias in investment as far as geographical, as in what's proximity, but also network, in the sense of people that get funded more often than not are connected to those groups directly or through a second or third layer of connection. So the way you work around that is very much around brand fame. So what are the things that you can do? And that doesn't mean you do a stunt like a Red Bull. It means that you have something which is clear and goes back to purpose again. So when you're doing outreach, and there's some examples I wish that I had, but within the sense of how you reach out to VCs, there was a good example I saw just today actually on LinkedIn. Someone reaching out about the really simple, the problem, their solution, and then setting up a meeting. But they also talked about something personal that they do. So the company had their own piece and they were helping house people. And I can't think what country it was now, but they were basically investing some of their money to help people who were moving from country to country under stress situations, war, etc., and investing money in that. And just that little personal touch allowed, and the VC talked about the story and shared that email from that startup. So being able to put what you believe in at a personal and professional level out there in the world and sharing that and not being too protective. Like, don't overthink your communications in the sense of being so like word heavy and trying to go too deep on what you do. Like, be loud and proud as far as what you're doing. And it is tough. And like, I'm fundraising now myself, and it is a challenging game. But I think to differentiate yourself, being able to stand out in creative ways and allow your brand to speak for itself, like finding those opportunities versus the traditional sort of trying to hunt down VCs, particularly if you don't have a network.
Right. Right. No, it's so interesting. I mean, it's so funny, like anything so brilliant and simple, like the three examples you showed, of those brands, it when you see it, it just seems like so obvious. And so,
Yeah.
of course they came up with that. But, when you're tasking yourself with, okay, what's my version of back sweat? Like, how can I figure that out? It's an impossible riddle to solve almost, which I suppose is why people need to really think about the point you made with the why and then, the how and then the what. So anyway, super helpful and really interesting. One more question. So trust is often considered the cornerstone of any community or brand, which is a point you make. What are the key actions a startup should take early on to build trust, both internally with their internal team and then the communities they aim to serve? And like, can you be very specific, like tangible examples?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll give you an example of one of my portfolio companies, which is Avalify, which is a AI tool that assesses global patents to see where your product stands with competitors in a certain space. The way that we're creating a market for one, like this tool doesn't exist and there's no competitors right now for us with what we're doing that specifically do what we're doing. So we're creating a market for investors to be able to look at startups and understand how their IP is legally sort of buttoned up in the sense of like, is there any IP risk within their business? So the way that we're building trust is one, it starts internally, which is sort of what I talked about. So we need to be able to be confident as a team in the product itself and all the things that we get as feedback. We have a large group of people that we have formal advisors, but also informal people that have invested in our studio. And we stress test our messaging, some of the questions, and we just ask very obvious, but really sort of brutal sometimes feedback from people as far as like, why would they use this or why wouldn't they use this? And one of the challenges that we faced is that people have to upload their pitch deck into our platform so we can get the data from that to then be able to do a global search of 200 million patents in a short space of time. So we need to get that elevation. So the way that we've done that is to pair up with family offices and VCs that are known, that have respect, and sharing stories together. So being able to use someone else's trust and brand to elevate our story and mission together. And we've offered that company a pretty long-term deal to use our service for free. So one, we're getting a customer that then tells their friends. Two, we're getting their validation, and that allows us to then grow the business. But the other part to that too is getting live feedback. So early customers, like they're your best friends. If you don't know your first 50 customers by first name, email address, then you're not doing your job. So you need to be able to nurture that. It feels heavy lifting, but I think getting that feedback, it doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but being sort of brave enough to be open to that, I think is really important too, because you'll find really juicy nuggets in that sometimes as well.
Yeah. Okay. Super, super helpful. Okay. There, I lied. There is another question. Uh, you mentioned reevaluating brand alignment. How can companies stress test their brand? And what are some indicators that the brand is no longer resonating?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll give you some data. So in the, again, Breen, who was stock exchange yesterday, in the top 500 publicly listed companies in the US, I think 10 years ago, the average tenure used to be 35 years that they would stay there. That research was done again 2 years ago, and it's gone down to 7 years as far as how long those companies are. And if you think about some of those unicorn bubbles, and there's been a lot of talk of that, but a lot of that too are legacy brands. They haven't adapted fast enough. So they get a competitor who's quite often a startup, actually come in, eat their market share, and then the old brand tries to spend money by, does it by spending money rather than changing their culture. So they'll put more money into marketing, paid ads, they'll fire their creative agency. They'll go through this really complicated process when they're not actually fixing the problem. I equate it to having been sick and getting medication for your symptoms rather than fixing the source of the problem. So if you can fix the source of the problem, the way that you do that is you actually go back to grassroots and what your brand stands for, define a purpose, and be open. Just say like, this wasn't something that was part of our culture 10 years ago. We're actively trying to change this and take people on that journey. Share your story, your process, the outcome. Make your internal team become the champions that actually drive that change internally and share that as well. And checking on progress. But, focus groups are easy ways to do it, but you can also test it. Like you can try different messaging, you can try different things and see what resonates with people, see what sticks. And you'll get a pretty good sense. People are very forthright. You don't even need to ask people for feedback. The world we live in today, people are not short of opinions. So being able to get a sense of that and get a pretty good barometer on sentiment is a nice way to do it.
Okay, great answer. And now there's yet another question. We're just not going to let you stop. Okay, so for a very early stage company that's still doing initial customer discovery, what are the right questions to ask to identify the brand values that are important to these customers?
Yeah, for sure. So I think within that, the most important thing is that you've spent time actually defining purpose and values before you start talking to your early customers. If you're thinking about what problem you're solving or the opportunity that you create, you need to put your head in the customer. And the way that you do that And I'm very, very adamant on this too, is that you have one product feature and one target customer. Like, don't try and boil the ocean from day one. And the reason that I raise that is that if you know one segment and you know who they are, how they act, what they're looking for, and you have one feature that solves that problem, you're able to then get this really tight dynamic with that feedback. And that creates trust. And if you've got a trusted relationship, then you can understand from them pretty quickly, what values that they have. And then again, it's all around sentiment. You can't take one person's feedback too literally. You need to be able to put it into a big pot and try and get a consensus or average or something within there where you see patterns that you can use that inform things. You might get a genius idea, or you could get someone who's a hater. But ultimately, the one big question you need to ask is, like, at that point, now that they've bought into it and they're excited about it, like, the question you have to ask them is, what would they do if they didn't have that product? And that's really, really interesting question to flip it the other way, rather than sort of say, what do they like about your product? If your product didn't exist in market anymore, what would they do? Where would they go? And then quite often what you hear from that is the workarounds that they've created with different tech stack, different solutions, different service providers, whatever it is. You learn so much information and you kind of get this emotional connection too, because it's almost like you're teasing someone, you're going to break up with them in a way. It's like, things aren't working out. We need to work on this and solve it. And it's kind of like speed dating in a way. So I think being able to have that human connection is a great way to start that conversation before, if you've just got an alpha that you're testing in market from a tech perspective, like, it's never too early to get feedback.
Yeah, so interesting. And really everything that you talked about, I can speak from the vantage point of founder of a seed stage startup. It just really, really resonates. It's great advice all around. Thank you for sharing this with our community. And I'm so excited that this will be a resource that we can continue to learn and grow. I want to go back and watch it again. And also, yes, your slides, we will definitely make them available and share. So everyone who's here, you'll be able to access those materials and resources. And I know we do, when our newsletter goes out, sometimes there's extra things we do to circulate, like anyone who RSVP'd for the Luma who didn't come, like, we'll send them the recording, things like that. So thank you so much, Andy, for this.